The most important thing that I can say to our audience is I think it's really important that all of us continue to fight for our values and continue to be unafraid. When 9/11 happened, the NYPD infiltrated the mosques, the community centers, the student groups right here in New Jersey. And what that led to was a chilling effect. And I think we're seeing a sort of repetition of those same sort of tactics. The surveillance state, making people feel like if you speak up, we're going to suppress your speech. The way we overcame that in Jersey City was we were unapologetic about our values, that we stood up and we stood together.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud.
Visit SumudPod.com to subscribe and connect with us on social media. Consider supporting our work through a contribution on the Support Us page.
On this episode of the Sumud Podcast, we uplift, empower, and amplify Mussab Ali. Mussab beat cancer, broke barriers, and never forgot where he came from. A proud Muslim and the son of Pakistani immigrants, he became Jersey City's youngest elected official, a Harvard-trained lawyer, and a fierce voice for justice. Now, he's running for mayor to fight for the city that raised him. Welcome, Mussab.
Thank you for having me.
So I got to say, I'm going to start this interview off a little bit differently because how old are you now? 28?
28.
28 years old. And I think you've accomplished more than many people in a whole lifetime. 2016, you ran for Jersey City Board. You did not win, but you ran again. And at the age of 20, you became the youngest elected official in New Jersey, if I'm not mistaken, in the US completely, correct?
So the youngest elected official in Jersey City,
Okay.
the youngest Muslim elected in the country.
Okay, there you go. You got reelected. You graduated from Rutgers with 2 degrees. I don't know how you did that. You studied in China. You went to Harvard. You became president of Jersey City Board of Education. You battled through cancer. And then eventually later on, you became the first ever national director for Vote 16 USA. So my first question is, what did your parents feed you, my man?
Listen, I don't know what my parents fed me. I think it has something to do with the birthing order. So I'm a middle child, right? And my elder brother and my younger sister, alhamdulillah, both very, very successful in their own careers. And so my big brother, his name's Mussab Ali, right? So imagine sort of growing up 2 years younger than a guy who has the same exact name as you and is just crushing it all the time. My brother was valedictorian in middle school, top of his class in high school, went to NYU Stern, was really just like very good at academics. And so I sort of had this challenge. It wasn't even me competing with my classmates. It was like me chasing after my brother. And I think that really trained me to be like, you know what, like I have to fight for myself and really set high expectations for myself. And, things just happen to work themselves out.
Yeah, mashallah. Well, so you're definitely a little bit competitive. That's what I'm hearing here. Just a little bit.
For sure.
Okay.
For sure.
Great. So you were born in Pakistan and you moved here at the age of 3. Is that correct?
Yep.
Your mother was an educator and your father was a postal worker?
So my father's a postal worker now.
Okay.
When we immigrated to this country, he was an engineer. He worked in Newark Airport. So we moved here September of 2000, right? So 9/11 happens. On September 11th, he has a job in Newark Airport. September 12th, they fire him because his name's Muhammad. And so that was sort of like the first time that I felt that there was something different in this country. As a young person, I don't think you really were able to understand what that was until much later in my life.
Your mother was also harassed and bullied because she wears a hijab, correct?
Yeah, my mom, if you meet her, I mean, like sweetest woman in the world, will talk to anybody. And she used to take the bus to school, like the public transportation. And for 3 years, like no one sat next to her just because she wore a hijab.
What did that experience teach you, just generally speaking, about being Muslim and being brown in the US?
I think I had the sense that we were different. And I had the sense that in some spheres in life, like we didn't exactly fit in. But I'll be honest with you, I think the amazing thing about Jersey City is that Jersey City is a super diverse city. It's 41% foreign born. And so you have a lot of people who come here who are just trying to make it, trying to figure out the American dream. And so even though there was definitely discrimination, I did feel a sense of like we were all in it together, right? All of us that were immigrants were sort of like fighting this collective battle instead of as much of like a one versus the other.
So talk to me about Jersey City a little bit, because in our research, I mean, you sold me on wanting to move there. You made it sound so beautiful and so diverse, which is not always obviously what we hear in the news or what we read in papers and things of that nature. But can you just describe living there and that overall experience?
Yeah, I used to say that Jersey City was like this hidden gem, but based on our rent these days, I don't think it's hidden much anymore. So we now have the second highest rent in the country. That's a function of so much demand, like people want to be there. And so when you look at the demographics of this city, right, median age is 34, so extremely young. This is 76% minority. So it's 28% Asian, 22% Black, 26% Hispanic, 24% white. And so you have people from all over this country. Like I mentioned, 41% foreign born. I mean, Jersey City is the home place of Ellis Island, right? So Ellis Island's address is 2 Communipaw Avenue, Jersey City, New Jersey. And so when you think about where people touched land for the first time in the United States, like it was actually in Jersey City. And then they spread out all throughout the country. And so what that's left in Jersey City is you have these pockets of all these different groups that immigrated to this country. So you have a Polish population, you have a Ukrainian population, you have a Filipino population, you have the Indian population. And so you have all these sort of groups that have come through Jersey City and sort of assimilated. But for so many people, it's a piece of home that they can find all over the city.
I know a few people that lived in Jersey City, but they went through the high school system and then they left. They moved to DC or California. You seem to have a huge loyalty and affinity for that community. Can you just talk about why?
I think the biggest reason is probably because as I was growing up, the people who were in leadership here weren't from Jersey City. And I'll tell you something that's really fascinating that I found was the high school that I went to was probably one of the best high schools in Jersey City, right? I went to a magnet public high school. It was called McNair Academic. At one point, it was ranked like top 15 in the entire country, right? Like exceptional talent. It's a citywide high school, right? Like you have to test in, but it's a public school. My high school class, like my classmates, 2 of us ended up at Harvard Law School. 1 went to Harvard Medical School and 1 went to Yale Law School. Like those are incredible outcomes for a private school, let alone a public school. Now, here's what's fascinating. When I was elected, I was the first person ever elected in my high school's history. No alumni in my high school had ever decided that they were going to run for office and serve in Jersey City. And I think that was a huge gap that I found. I said to myself, like, why is it that the most talented people in our city leave the city? They don't want to be here. They don't want to be part of the political process. And that to me really made me feel like there had to be some sort of change that we could enact. And for me, I mean, like, look, I love this place. I would never leave. It's a great place to raise your kids. But I think for so many families, like they haven't found success or they felt like, there were greener pastures somewhere else. And I think there has been a transformation that's happened in this city. I think at one point in time, making it was leaving. Now making it is, can you afford to stay here?
That's fascinating. So you did not want to get into politics. So we're going to give a shout out, believe it or not, to Donald Trump, because if I'm not mistaken, he was one of the motivations for you wanting to run for public office when he claimed that not during or after 9/11, Muslims were celebrating in Jersey City. And that sort of woke you up, if you will, and said, no, that's not accurate. We got to do something here.
Yeah. So his quote was in a rally in Alabama, oddly enough. I think it was Alabama or Tennessee or something. And he makes this quote, and think about how crazy this claim is. Like during 9/11, as the Twin Towers are falling, he says, I looked across the river and I saw all these people celebrating on the rooftops of Jersey City, New Jersey. And, they call him out on TV the next day. They're like, look, we checked every TV channel, right? Like no one was celebrating. He was like, no, I saw them with my own 2 eyes, right? Celebrating across the river. And, again, I have a lot of hometown pride. And so for me, like for someone to say that about your hometown, I mean, you think about the stuff that happened in Springfield, Ohio, right? Where you're saying they're eating the cats and dogs. That got national publicity, right? People talked about it all over this country. The same thing happened in Jersey City, and I didn't feel like people were taking it as seriously, right? Some people have heard that quote, but a lot of people have never heard that quote about Jersey City. And I think the fact that this is someone talking about my hometown, I felt, you know what? He's targeting my exact population. Because even in Springfield, Ohio, I mean, he wasn't talking about like one specific group. He was just like, they are doing this, right? In our situation, he was literally saying the Muslims in Jersey City are celebrating 9/11. Going back to the story about my dad and my mom growing up, I was like, how could this man say this about my town? We need to do something. So I ended up running for office. And at the time, there had never been even a Muslim elected to office in Jersey City history.
Why did you select Board of Education to go after first?
I had no idea about politics at all. Literally, if you were to ask me at 19 years old, like what public officials I knew the mayor of my town, I knew the president of the United States. Okay. I didn't know anything else even existed. And I remember thinking to myself, like, okay, I'm 19 years old. Like, what am I qualified for? Right? Like city council? Like, I don't really know what's going on with the city. But I said to myself, you know what? For the past 14 years, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, I've been in school. And my pitch to voters is I've seen how policy trickles into the classroom. And at the same time, I mean, I do think that, students are often the forgotten stakeholders of education. I would say at debates all the time. I'd say, look, like we talk to parents, we talk to teachers, we talk to administrators, we talk to taxpayers, but we never ask students about their education. I saw so many examples of that actually when I was in the education system of what was going wrong. I'll give you a great example of this. So when I was the president of the board of ed, I started a participatory budgeting project, right? So I gave every high school $10,000. And I asked the students, no teacher oversight, no administrators, students, where do you want me to spend this money? Now, my opponents, they're all saying to me, look, you're talking to a bunch of 16, 17-year-olds. They're going to say, go buy a PS5, take us to Disneyland, right? Do you know what every single high school said?
Mm.
Fix our bathrooms.
Wow.
And I think that just goes to show you, right? Like, why is that voice being suppressed? Why is it that we're not going to these people who on a day in and day out basis are facing these problems? I mean, kids were saying to me, look, my stalls on my bathroom have been broken for 4 or 5 years, right? I haven't had toilet paper. I know there's certain bathrooms, there is no soap. And if that is their lived reality of these young people and nobody is standing up for them, like, why are we not empowering them to talk about the problems that they're facing? Because I think what happens is, that translates into adulthood where people don't feel empowered to speak to government about the issues that they're facing because they feel like no one's listening.
Wasn't water fountains an issue as well?
So water fountains had been shut down since I was in third grade. And the reason they didn't ask for water fountains is they didn't even know that was a solution, right? Imagine growing up your whole life and you've just never had a water fountain in school. You just think to yourself, like, that's our reality. We don't have water fountains. So in third grade, they'd shut them all down. And so when I got elected, I started this process and I said, look, like, why do we keep buying these water coolers? They didn't have water fountains, so they would put water coolers. When the water cooler ran out, that was it, right? So imagine a hot summer day. The water cooler probably runs out at like 10 a.m., 11 a.m. For the rest of the day, there's just no water in the school system. So I said, look, why don't we actually fix the root of this problem and get clean drinking water in our school system? And alhamdulillah, by last year, they officially fixed all the water fountains, but it was like a multi-year process to get that done.
That's a huge win.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, inshallah, that's amazing. So when you ran the first time and you lost, a lot of times, especially at that age, most people would just pack it in and say, you know what, maybe not now, maybe in 4 or 5 years. Going back to that competitive nature, I guess, with your brother, you're like, no, I'm going to do this one more time and we're going to win it this time. I think it was an unfinished term as well, correct?
Yeah, I think the circumstances just played out really nicely for me in some ways, right? So, I have this weird feeling about destiny sometimes where I'm like, I just think destiny grabs you and you're used for some sort of purpose. And so for me, like, it's 2017. Trump has just passed the Muslim ban. I'm sitting back in organic chemistry. My parents are like, all right, you're back to pre-med. Like, go back to class, sort of figure this out. And as I'm sitting there, someone announces a resignation for the Board of Education. They say there's a 1-year seat that's going to open up. And I say to myself, look, I'm going to take one more shot at it. This is an opportunity for me to step up. It's a 1-year seat. If Jersey City's ever going to elect a 20-year-old Muslim kid, like, this is probably my best shot. And unfortunately, what happens is the mayor recruits my opponent. And so let me tell you the tale of the tape here, right? I'm a 20-year-old college kid who's lost my last campaign. My opponent is a 2-tour Afghanistan veteran. He's a VP at a bank in his mid-40s.
Hey, what's wrong with people in their 40s? What are we trying to say?
I'm saying he had all the advantages, right? He
Yeah.
had the built-in advantage. Like, I should have lost that election. There's no reason I win that election.
Yeah.
We end up winning that election 9,388 to 9,320. 68 votes.
Did you feel like you were the underdog, or did you feel like there was an angle that you were able to capitalize on to end up winning that?
I definitely thought we were the underdogs. I think walking into that race, I had seen how bad we had lost in 2016. 2016, I was really naive. Like, I thought I was going to win in 2016, right? I'm a 19-year-old kid. I have no idea how politics works. I'm like, I see my stuff on Facebook. Some people are sharing it. I'm like, yeah, we're getting some traction. In 2017, I was much more clear-eyed about it. And I was like, okay, based on demographics, based on voting behavior, we are not in the strongest position. But I also had faith in my team, right? And my team consists of young people. I mean, part of my whole story in politics has been empowering a new generation to get involved in the political system. My campaign manager, I was 20, he was 19, right? And so we were here building a grassroots coalition of many people who couldn't even vote, who were knocking on doors, sending out mailers. What's been incredible about that is even now, as I'm running for mayor, I've had people reach out to me who are 25, 26, who were like, yeah, I remember knocking on doors for you when I was 17, right? And so there's this sort of like longevity to what we've built, the sort of infrastructure that's there, where one of the most fascinating things about sitting here today is if I went to my high school today and I asked them how many of them know the school board, almost all of them do. Whereas like that was just not the case when I was in the system.
Yeah. So talk about some of your wins specifically for the Muslim community. I think you had advocated for Eid to be a school holiday, if I'm not mistaken. You fought for halal options or meal options. I'm not sure if you were able to successfully pass those, but just
Yeah.
talk a little bit about your successes.
Yeah, so I think we had a lot of wins for the Muslim community. I mean, Eid was one of the big ones. The community had actually been fighting for Eid even before my election. And so when I got there, that was the first year that Eid was actually officially a holiday, not just for Muslims, but for everybody in the school system. So everybody gets off on Eid. It became a part of the calendar. People got to learn about why are people taking off for this day. We were able to get halal food successfully in the schools. So we were able to get our schools that had their own kitchens to get halal food serviced. But I want to share one other story that I think, people don't realize how much bias is built into laws. So one of the first things I had to deal with was there was this girl who was wearing an African head wrap. Now she wasn't Muslim, but she was wearing this head wrap to school. And this was at my alma mater. And the administrator, the principal, said to her that she wasn't allowed to do that. She was like, look, like you're not allowed to wear this. It's not under the student code of conduct. So we take a look at the student code of conduct. And the code of conduct says you are not allowed to wear any sort of headwear, including religious headwear, without the note of a religious authority. Now, of course, this wasn't being enforced, right? But think about the fact that someone who wrote this bill thought to themselves, like, hey, if someone's coming to wear a turban, if someone's coming to wear a hijab, they need to have a note from an imam or to have a note from a rabbi or a note from some sort of religious leader in order for that to be permissible, right? That is the difference. And we think about who are the people who are writing our laws, who are the people who are elected to represent us.
So you also were able to eradicate the student debt for lunches as well?
One thing that I think about all the time, which is that we, as a country, despite being the wealthiest country in the world, require students to pay for school lunch. And if they cannot pay for school lunch, we literally put them in debt. What used to happen is if your parents weren't able to pay, instead of getting a full lunch, you just got a cheese sandwich. And I imagine not only the stigma, but also the lack of nutrition that we're providing our young people, right? Sort of punishing them for saying, hey, your parents are not wealthy enough to be able to cover this, or they're spending their money on something else, some other essential goods that they have that they need. And so because of that, we're going to deprive you of your nutrition. And so, I took a bold stand with our Board of Education. I said, look, we are going to go and we're going to cancel student lunch debt. We have enough money in our budget to make sure that every kid can eat for free and that every kid who has any debt left over, like we're going to wipe it off. And that was something that we were really proud of.
That's amazing. That's absolutely powerful. Kudos to you for that.
Thank you.
Did they think you were crazy for trying to pull that off, or was it totally weird for them that somebody actually cares about the community?
The fascinating thing to me is not so much about how weird people think it is. It's more so that people don't come up with these ideas before. It's also a reflection of like how far elected officials are from the lived reality of their constituents. Like when you have people in Congress that are like in their 80s, they have no semblance of what is happening on a day-to-day basis of the average median American. And I think I see that all the time on school districts. Who are the people who are serving on school districts for the most part? It's people who are retirees, people who have all this excess time on their hands and they're able to spend it to volunteer on this board. I mean, like, how do you explain to them what Snapchat is, right? Like, we had issues with Snapchat and they're like, what do you mean we can't get the files? It's like, no, it disappears. They're like, what do you mean it disappears? Like, I have it on my phone. If you delete it, you can go to recently delete it. And that's the advanced ones that sort of understand that. So I just think there's this huge disconnect from like day-to-day lives of people and the people that we have in office.
Just to list two other victories I thought was extremely powerful. You increased support staff and teacher salaries, which is amazing. Again, that's an issue across many different school districts across the US. How did you do that, especially because I think there was some budgetary issues as well? How did you pull that off?
Yeah. So increasing teacher wages was always big for us because I felt like we always underpaid our teachers, especially starting out. So the starting salary for teachers was around $54,000 when I came in, and we were able to negotiate that up to $61,000. So that's a massive increase, right? You think about a $7,000 pay bump, and it wasn't just for new teachers. A lot of teachers who had been in the system, some of them, even by year 4, year 5, were not making $61,000. And so we increased all of their salaries overnight. And the way we did that actually was leveraging the pandemic. Because when the pandemic was happening, I think a lot of parents remember this. In the beginning of the pandemic, parents were literally like, do whatever it takes to get my kid out of my house, right? They were like, listen, like, I understand teachers should be paid whatever they want. Like, we believe that teachers are like the most amazing people in the world. Pay them whatever you want. And so we were able to leverage that to actually go and have this negotiation with the teachers union. What was tough about it though was we negotiated about like a $10 million increase from my board that we could give to the union. And when I went to the union, originally they said to me, just give all the money to the top. They were like, hey, what about the teachers that have been here 20 years? And I was like, look, I respect the teachers that have been here 20 years. But what I was thinking about was the teachers that are at the bottom who are just coming into the system. We need to incentivize them to stay. And we need to let them know, like, hey, we want you to be part of this district. And so it took a lot of negotiation in order to get that to happen. But we took almost no money at the top and spent all the money on the bottom of the ladder, which I thought was huge.
So look, I wear a lot of hats and many people think I'm crazy. But I got to say, I think you taught me a little bit here. I mean, you're on the Board of Education and then you decide to study abroad in China. I think you got even some heat for trying to pull that off as well. But how did you do that and how did you make it work?
So I won this award called the Schwarzman Scholarship. So for those people that are familiar with the Rhodes Scholarship, Steve Schwarzman, who's this billionaire at Blackstone, he basically was like, look, where is the UK in today's global powers? When the Rhodes Scholarship started, the UK and the US were like these two powerful countries that dominated global affairs. And his whole premise was, the 21st century, it's not going to be the UK and the US anymore. It's going to be the US and China. And a lot of people in the US know very little about China, myself included. I'll be honest with you. When I applied for this award, I knew nothing about China. I couldn't speak any Chinese. I had very preliminary understanding of what was going on in China, how they were investing in the world. But I was fortunate enough to get this scholarship. It was extremely competitive. This was around the time that I got reelected. And I said to the scholarship committee, look, it's one thing that 20 of you in a room think I'm going to be a future global leader, right? It's another thing for 22,000 people in my city to have trusted me with their children's future. I think both of us know what's more important. The only way I'm going to do this thing is if you make the election work for me. And so they actually flew me back and forth to hit my board meetings. And there was this incredible flight that doesn't exist anymore. So China is exactly 12 hours time difference, and the flight was exactly 12 hours. So you could leave from China at 9 a.m. and arrive in the US 9 a.m. at the same time because the whole time zone difference. So that was a flight that I used to take. Literally, I'd sleep on the plane, I'd get up, and like, boom, I was here. And then when I'd go back, I would lose a day exactly at the same way. So I would leave at 9 p.m., arrive at 9 p.m. the next day. But I was doing that flight while I was in China for 4 months, and then COVID happens. And so, COVID-19, 2019, they shut down China. It took until March here, but I actually had insight while I was sitting on that school board of, guys, like, this is not getting any better. And I remember saying that to my colleagues in January, and they sort of laughed about it, like, oh, it's going to go away in a couple of weeks. Then February rolls around, and then March. And I remember still the day we had our first case and we shut down everything. Again, I had been learning online for a couple months already at that point.
What's your biggest takeaway from that experience in China and specifically how you would govern, generally speaking, as an elected official?
I think China does a really good job of learning from the rest of the world. And I think the US, unfortunately, we have this idea that we know everything and that we're the best. And that was the case once upon a time. Once upon a time, the US was the global leader in innovation across the board. But today we're not. And I think we have to accept that there are other countries that do incredible things, that are able to use a public space really well when it comes to some bike lanes, when it comes to construction, when it comes to thinking about how we build in terms of urbanism. There are other countries that do a really incredible job, and the US refuses to learn from them. What China does really well is China says, okay, what's the best model in the world, and how do we replicate that? Instead of thinking about innovation in and of itself.
So you got your degree from there while being on the Board of Education, and you're like, you know what? I want to do something even harder. I want to go to Harvard Law School. What was your motivation there, and how did you pull that one off?
How I pulled it off, I mean, that God knows. God knows how I got in there. Look, when it comes to like elite academic spaces, in many ways, it's a gamble, right? Like you shoot your odds and you see how things work out. And what's incredible about that story is Harvard's the only law school I got into, right? So I applied to a couple different law schools. That's the only place I got in. So it very much was like I rolled the dice. Harvard took a chance on me and they were like, you know what? Let's try this guy out, see how it goes. But what happened, I think, was while I was in China and the US, flying back and forth, I have this reflection about like, you know what? Med school is just not going to work for me. I thought about what it would mean to be in medical school. I thought about how many incredible doctors we have in our community. And I realized that there was a big gap when it came to public officials and people who understood the law. And I said to myself, you know what? I'm going to apply to law school, see how it goes. I was fortunate enough to get into Harvard. And then that was another 3 years of commitment of my life. And it was some of the best years.
So what was your biggest takeaway from Harvard?
I think the biggest takeaway came actually that first year. So the first year of law school is notorious for being the hardest one. So I'm a 1L in law school. They elect me then the president of the Board of Education. So this January of 2021. So I'm the president of the Board of Education. And now I'm doing my 1L. I'm dealing with this pandemic. I'm figuring out all this stuff. And that same month, I get the official cancer diagnosis. And I think the biggest takeaway after that experience was that we can do anything. Like if you really set your mind to it, anything is possible.
How were you feeling before that cancer diagnosis? Was there a reason you went to the doctor, or was it just through a routine checkup?
I had a cough. The crazy thing about this is, in the middle of the pandemic, you have a cough, you're like, I have COVID, right?
Right.
And then, when the cough persists, you're kind of like, I have long COVID, right? Like that was sort of the general feeling at the time. So I'm thinking to myself, like, it's nothing serious, but this cough is sort of persistent. And at one point, I say to myself, let me just get an x ray done, see how things are going. And things just like really spiraled very quickly from there.
What was your first reaction when you heard the news? Because again, you have so much going on. You're an extremely busy individual. And I can't imagine the struggle or the pain that you felt immediately knowing that you have a whole other battle that you're about to go through. And by the way, you were interning at the same time of this cancer battle. I mean, we're going to talk about that too.
Yeah. So the internship comes at the end of this. And that goes back to this destiny question, right? How things play out. But we'll get into that in a second. Look, I would say my initial reaction was I remember being very upset and feeling like it was unfair, right? I felt like I was serving my community, I was giving back. It was like, like why would God do this to me, right? I feel like I've been trying to do all the right things. It also publicly really affected how I thought about my self-image because, I've sort of built myself up as the guy who can get anything done. Wonder kid who's like doing the homework, make sure that, things are moving forward. I mean, this is the reason they elected me as the chair at 23. And now suddenly I had this massive chink in my armor and I'm not sure how people are going to react to it, right? Because I myself am thinking like, all right, is it possible for me to manage, intensive chemotherapy? I mean, we literally had to get on a clinical trial, right? Because the at the point that we were at in our cancer, the doctor basically said to me like, if we do traditional treatment, you will be back here in 6 months. But there's a new clinical trial that you can do that you can try, but it's a one shot, and if you do this, you'll never be able to do chemotherapy again. And so I knew that this was going to be like a really intensive regimen. And at the same time, like I have these other responsibilities, right? Like I'm in charge of, the health and safety of 30,000 children. And then somehow basically my third quest is figuring out my first year of law school at Harvard, right? So I'm like, okay, this is definitely a challenge and I'm not sure how this is going to work itself out.
12 rounds of chemotherapy. Is that
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Did you feel when you were going through that? My mother went through cancer and she ended up passing away of leukemia. So I sort of got to see that.
Yeah.
Um, did you feel alone? Did you have friends with you, family with you, or did you feel like you were on an island by yourself?
I think what really sucked about it was during the pandemic. And so what that meant was no one was allowed to visit during chemotherapy. No one was allowed to visit basically period because the point at which my white blood cells were at, they basically said, look, if you get COVID, you're dead. They're like, that's just it. Like you cannot afford to get COVID at all. And so I'm sort of operating in this bubble. I was just continuing the Zoom world where like you interact with people online and you're making decisions, reading my books. And I think it was definitely lonely. But at the same time, I'll be honest with you, like having other problems to distract me made it a little bit easier, right? Instead of thinking about my own issue, I'm like, oh, we have this $70 million budget crisis. How are we going to fix this? Right. And so I'm just thinking about problems instead of thinking about like what's going on with me on a day to day basis.
Did you make a commitment to yourself during that whole ordeal? For example, did you say, if I get through this, I am definitely going to do X, Y, or Z?
Actually, I think the best part about that experience is I think some of us have this thought of like, if the doctor says to you, you have 6 months to live, what are you going to do? And what was so refreshing to me is I looked myself in the mirror and I was like, you know what? I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing. Like serving my community, like this is what I want to do. And so the commitment that I made to myself was, look, if I get through this, inshallah, if Allah's happy with me and this is it, I was happy. But I said, if Allah gives me more time, I want to continue public service. I want to continue to be involved in giving back to my community, find a way to serve, and find a way to be involved in bringing people together.
And you decide to intern at the very end?
Okay. So remember how you asked me my first thought, right? Like my first thought was like, oh, like I'm upset and processing that. Maybe not my second, but like my third thought was, where am I going to intern this summer? Okay. I think fitting for my personality, right? So I'm like, okay, where am I going to intern this summer? I sort of realized the traditional internship that I was thinking about probably wasn't going to work. I was planning to work at the ACLU of New Jersey. And the same cancer hospital where I get admitted literally comes to Harvard Law School 1 week later and says, we're looking for one intern. Now, I don't tell them that I have cancer. I just go through the interview process traditionally, go through the whole thing. And when I get the job, I tell the guy, I'm like, by the way, I was going to see you this summer anyway. And the general counsel looks at me, he's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, I literally just got admitted to your hospital. And so I spent that summer, 14th floor chemotherapy, basically like the 20th floor in the legal department, navigating it. And the craziest part about that was I start chemo in February, right? I started my summer internship in June. My last day of chemotherapy was my last day of work.
Wow. Wow. So you get bored pretty fast, I'm guessing here. You got to keep moving, huh?
Things just happen to fall in my lap. I don't know what to say.
Talk to me a little bit about the Ali Leadership Institute. I think you started that after you left the Board of Education. Is that correct?
No, so we started that in 2018. My sister and I, after we got elected, I sort of looked around and I realized that there was no one else in the political sphere that was close to our age, right? Everyone was decades older than I was. And I thought to myself, like, what's the best way to invite young people and to take all this energy that we've built in our campaign and leverage it into something that can be powerful in order of changing our community? So my sister and I co-founded the Ali Leadership Institute, and it's an organization that trains the next generation of activists, organizers, and grassroots leaders. We take students between the ages of 16 and 22, and we train them on civic engagement. We train them on media training. We give them a project to like build in their community. We teach them about running for office. We teach them about fundraising. These are all skills that we try to provide them over the course of 8 weeks. What's been incredible about that program is I've had students who have graduated from that program that have gone on to build projects or to go on to incredible universities. So one of my students was just awarded a Truman Scholarship. One of our students from this past cohort just got admitted to Princeton University. One of our students built this GED program for prisoners that has graduated over 150 people who are incarcerated and taught them to learn or read at a third grade level, right? So we're building all these projects and they're all by young people, right? And the purpose of that is to teach them that like you can be 16 and 17 and you can start to change your community. That you don't have to wait until you're in your 40s or 50s to think about how am I giving back now? You can be conscious about giving back even as a young person.
Is this a national program or is it just Jersey City?
So we started just in Jersey City and we started with 10 students. We're now all across New Jersey. So we have 5 chapters and 50 students this year. We've been exploring opportunities to be nationwide. I think between my sister's really hectic schedule and my really hectic schedule, we haven't gotten around to getting somebody to help us sort of branch out. But inshallah, plans for the future.
I think you need to come out to DC and I think you need to get Preston to help you figure that out too when you get a chance.
Absolutely. Why not?
So I think people had asked you if you were going to run for mayor the first time, but it wasn't good timing with the cancer and obviously being in law school. But then now you decided to run. I think you announced earlier in the year. Why mayor? Why now?
I think it's interesting for people to understand the context of New Jersey politics, to understand like how consequential this seat is. I would argue the mayor of Jersey City is probably the 4th or 5th most powerful position in New Jersey. So there's the governor, there's our 2 US senators, and then I would say mayor of Jersey City is probably number 4, or you could say mayor of Newark, right? We're kind of sister cities about the same size. So the mayor of Jersey City right now, he decided he was going to run for governor. Like he decided that's his next step. And when I saw that he was stepping up for that seat, and again, I'd been approached in 2021, folks had asked me to run against him. I looked at the opportunity, I looked at the people who were in the race, and I said to myself, you know what, this is a great chance for me to step up, not just to represent myself, but I think to represent a lot of voices in our community. And I think a big part of this actually relates to the Palestine issue as well. So I graduated from law school in 2023. October 7th happens a couple months after my graduation. So I'm working in voting rights at the time. And as I'm doing that, the Harvard Law School Muslim Law Students Association, they put out this statement and those students get doxxed all across the internet. And these are my friends, like these are kids that I went to school with. At the same time, my advisors are saying to me, they're like, Mussab, look, you went to Harvard, you beat cancer, you've been elected before. If you do not talk about Palestine, you will get elected to whatever you want. And I think that sort of reminded me how broken our political system was. That my advisors, despite knowing how important my values were to me, were saying, you just need to avoid this issue. I think speaks to how broken our country is when it comes to speaking truth to power, right? And I made a very deliberate choice at that moment. I said, look, I'm going to speak up because what is the point of me being in politics if I'm not there to advance our community, right? If I'm not there to speak truth to power, if I'm not being authentic. Because I would say to you, the most valuable thing I think I've learned on the campaign trail is how important it is to be authentic. People can smell inauthenticity. I think people sense when people are not being truthful with them. That's why a lot of people are disenchanted with politicians, right? That's why politicians have such a bad name, because you're like, you can't trust them. You don't know if they mean what they say. So as I sort of weighed those factors and I weighed this election and I weighed, the level of experience that we've gotten at this point in time, I just said to myself, you know what? I think mayor is the next challenge. I think it provides a very strong bully pulpit to speak about a lot of different issues. But at the same time, like, you can get things done. And I think part of what's frustrating about Congress sometimes is you look at the people that are in Congress and it is hard to see progress being made. Versus at the local level, I mean, like, when you're in the mayor seat, you can sort of say, look, we're going to do this project and you can get it done.
So where do your opponents stand on Palestine? Just curious.
Yeah, so there was a ceasefire resolution that we were able to bring to the table in Jersey City. And one of my opponents just like openly voted against it. He abstained in that vote, which was effectively a no vote. And then another one of my opponents also abstained. So two of them are on the city council right now. They both abstained on the issue. My other opponent, he has actually a very deep history with the other side, where he was the governor of New Jersey and he had to resign in disgrace because he was sexually assaulting a male staffer. And part of the impropriety around this issue was that this male staffer was an Israeli national who he made the head of Homeland Security post 9/11. We're talking about national security issues. You're making him the head of Homeland Security. He's not even a US citizen. And effectively, like, this is someone that he was having improper relationships with. So I think in terms of his position on this issue, I think he's been very openly opposed to even showing up at anything related to Palestine, talking about the issue, even acknowledging, I think, what's been going on.
So why should anybody who cares about Palestine care about this race that you're in Jersey City?
I think it's definitely an opportunity to make a strong statement around running and supporting our values. Because I think that this is a chance for us where, as a candidate, I've been very open on this issue. I've been thrown out of meetings because of Palestine. I've called out my congressman on Palestine. There's been articles written about that. But it's an opportunity to say, look, you can stand for your values and still be elected in this country. Because I think, especially for our young people, I see this all the time where they're fearful about this idea that, like, can I be true to who I am and be in the political arena? I get this question all the time. People say to me all the time, like, hey, I want to run for office one day, but I don't want to compromise myself, especially on issues that I care about. When it comes to Palestine, like, I don't want to be silent on this issue. And that is the only way that I can be elected. And I think what we're building here is we're demonstrating a model where you can be vocal on international human rights issues and at the same time be rooted in your community. And people are willing to elect you because they both agree with you on the fact that we need to speak truths to power and the fact that they believe in your vision. And I think that's sort of what we're building here. And I think that's what's been extremely powerful. And I think it's a model for the rest of this country.
You were thrown out of a meeting?
Yeah, the ceasefire resolution that I talked about, one meeting, we brought 300 people to the city council chambers, right? So we packed the entire city hall. And they promised us, city council promised us that they were going to vote on the ceasefire resolution. Because my whole thing was, I wasn't sure we had the votes, but at the very least, bring the resolution to the floor, vote on it, and let us know where you stand. Eventually they did. We still didn't have the votes, but at least we know where they stood. So that meeting, we bring 300 people, and city council president makes a statement while we have all the people there ready to sign up and ready to speak. We're not going to vote on this resolution today. And I was just appalled. I'm like, man, we organized for this. We talked about this. At the very least, have the balls to say, I'm not with you. Say that, as opposed to saying, I'm just going to kick this down for another 2 weeks so the crowd can get smaller, so like less people can see us, less people can hold us accountable. Because ultimately, we're going to hold them accountable regardless. So I speak up, and they make it out to like I was like, causing public disruption. But I just spoke up and I said, look, how many more people are going to die for you to call for a ceasefire, right? Like, how much longer is this going to go? As I say that, the city council president has a police officer escort me out, right? Then the headline, like the front page of the paper the next day, former school board president kicked out of a meeting for ceasefire. And I think they were very deliberate about the headline. They're very deliberate about what they were talking about and how they presented the issue. And I think for me, I wear it as a badge of honor, right? Yeah, when it comes to this issue, I'm willing to speak out and I'm willing to speak truth to power because it is not okay. It is not acceptable for people in this country to shy away from these issues.
Has AIPAC come after you yet?
I think AIPAC doesn't get involved in local races yet.
I don't know. With you involved here, I don't know. I think that's going to change pretty fast, my friend.
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
Again, we're not scared.
Yeah. Let's just say you are going to win, inshallah, and you're elected. What's your first 30 days look like?
I think the first 30 days, the most important thing to us is housing and affordability. I think we're going to change our vision and our master plan when it comes to what kind of housing we're building, making sure that we can build affordable housing, making sure that people can afford to live and stay in Jersey City, the people that have built this city. Then we're also hyper focused on transportation. We've thought a lot about building a city run bus system that sort of can connect people in and around the city. One of the things that really stands out to us is only 17% of people who live in Jersey City work in Jersey City, despite the fact that we have just as many jobs as we have people that are working. And so I think part of that is because they don't have reliable transportation in and around the city. They actually have better transportation outside of the city. And so we're thinking about, what does our transportation infrastructure look like? What is sustainability going to look like? And I think the third most important thing for me is education. My background as someone who's been on the board of ed, I think that the mayor and the school board need to work hand in hand together. What happened when I was in the school district was that City Hall and the board of ed were at odds with each other. And that led to the state coming in and cutting over $300 million in school funding because they saw this gap and they were like, look, we're going to come in and we're going to attack. So I think those are the three big things I think about. I think about affordability and housing. I think about sustainability and transportation. And I think about education.
So I'm going to throw you a curveball. The first 30 days in office, what are you going to say or pass regarding Palestine?
Look, what's been really incredible to me is we have a Palestine flag raising happening this Friday. We had it actually canceled last year. And a lot of us spoke up about it and said, look, like it's not acceptable for you to say that you're not going to raise the Palestinian flag because of the conflict that's happening. For them to say, look, there's a genocide that's going on and we're going to not raise this flag because there's heightened tensions in our community and people are going to feel unsafe. I think it starts to build this slippery slope of, look, yeah, you know what? If a certain mayor comes in, they can say, oh, I'm not going to raise flags this today because I feel a certain way about issues. I think when it comes to the Palestine issue, I think we want to be very deliberate around making sure that we respect all international human rights, that we pass a resolution in support of statehood for the Palestinians, that we talk about that this is a part of our community, that Palestinians who are here, we recognize them, we see them, we understand their struggles, and we want them to feel welcomed in Jersey City. Because I think so often there's been this discourse around making sure Israelis feel welcome in our communities. Almost never hear a politician talking about, I want to make sure Palestinians feel welcome. Because we see hate crimes happen in this city, right? I mean, the rhetoric that happens from the federal level, it comes down to the local level, and people feel like it's okay to say whatever they want about people who support Palestinians and human rights.
So I've asked, I think, everyone on this podcast who is running for office, Jill Stein, Cornel West, I think even Preston, I had asked this question as well. One state or two state? Of course, there's this narrative, a big push of a two-state solution. Not generally possible given everything that's happening. That's my opinion, and many people share that opinion. Where do you stand on it?
I think if you asked me a couple years ago, I would have said two-state because I think that there was still some way to reconcile and make it so that there were two states that sort of work together. I think today, I think you have to find a one-state solution because I don't see this process working. And fundamentally, I mean, let's be honest, it is currently a one-state solution, right? Like what currently exists is there's the occupied regions in Palestine that don't have their own individual statehood. They don't have the ability to make independent decisions without looking to Israel for permission to do their daily commerce. And so I think you need to have one state solution eventually. I think that's where everything is leading towards, but it's got to be one state with equal rights for everybody. And I think what you see even within Israel is that there are tiers of citizenship that exist for those people who are Jewish and have a certain kind of citizenship, and for those people that are Arab that have a different kind of citizenship. And so I think it's important that we bring the sort of model that happened in South Africa, that same sort of model that would come, because over time, like that is how you got rid of apartheid. And that is how you were able to blend these people together and say, look, there's going to be equality across the board. And that requires international pressure.
Just curious. I know the answer, but just curious. You said that you would have agreed to two-state a few years ago. Why is that?
I think for me, as I think about what proponents of Israeli statehood and what proponents of Palestinian statehood were projecting, it was this idea that it was neighbors that could live peacefully side by side, that there would have been an independent economy for the Palestinians where they could have had their own leadership, they could have worked together with people in the region. But I think as you look at what's been happening over time, I think that Palestinians have become less and less able to operate independently. And I think you see that. I mean, I was fortunate enough to go to Palestine, to the West Bank, I want to say in 2022, right before all this stuff happened. And I think when I went there with my own two eyes, it is impossible to be there and to feel as though like this is an independent state, right? I mean, you are constantly surrounded by the IDF. There are checkpoints everywhere. People that look like me get stopped, right? They ask for my name. They ask for my father's name, my grandfather's name. I was detained at the airport for, I think, 6 hours on the way in and 8 hours on the way out. There's no way that I think you can look at that and say, yeah, there's possibility for this one state to exist and coexist with one another.
What made you decide to visit Palestine?
So Harvard actually had a PAL trek. So every year, Harvard has this I-Trek where students go to Israel every single year. And in response to that, a Palestinian activist got together and said, look, we're going to organize a PAL trek where people actually get the chance to explore Palestine. And so I was fortunate enough to be selected to go with Palestinians who, many of them, today are key leaders in the Palestinian movement. And I was able to go with them and actually visit Palestine and got to explore and talk to people and talk to students who existed there, talk to some people in the political environment who were there. Very eye-opening experience.
What's your one takeaway from that visit?
I think the biggest thing that I took away was just a lack of recognition for the people that are in Israel for what is happening in Palestine. So we also visited Haifa as well. So they took us to Jerusalem. We went to Nablus. We went to Ramallah. And then I think we stopped at Haifa right before we went back to Tel Aviv to leave. And when you're in Haifa, just having conversations with people, because we had just gone through the Palestinian West Bank, and now you're in Haifa, and now you're talking to people and trying to get their perspective of what's going on. And I think that it is two different information ecosystems that exist. And what's fascinating is actually it reminds me a lot of China, because in China, that they have like very specific kind of news that you're allowed to read, right? There's no Google in China. There's no New York Times. Like you have very specific kind of information that you're getting. And I felt very similarly where like I'm traveling just a couple of miles and suddenly like the ecosystem of information is totally different in terms of how they're thinking about Palestinians, how they think about their lives, their aspirations, their dreams. I just think it was like a totally different ecosystem that existed there.
Hmm. So if you get elected, I'm assuming there's an inauguration or a ceremony after. Is that correct? Let's make a deal here. You throw on the keffiyeh for that day?
Look, I'm okay. I'm okay with that. This is funny. So Cal Penn did a comedy show for us, right? Great comedian, New Jersey guy, Harold and Kumar, right? And when he came to do a comedy show for us, there's a photo of me at Eid wearing a keffiyeh. And, look, I'm very careful about how I speak about what's going on. And I've been very deliberate about saying, look, we need a ceasefire. I like cite everything that I talk about, right? Israel is considered an apartheid state by the Harvard International Human Rights Clinic. That is a definition by the Harvard International Human Rights Clinic. This is not me coming up with something. There was a group that went on Instagram that does a whole push that says Mussab is a huge anti-Semite. Look at our evidence. And they put two pieces of evidence. The first piece of evidence was me saying we need a ceasefire in Gaza, right? Anti-Semite. And the second piece of evidence was the fact that I wore a keffiyeh on Eid. Those two pieces of evidence was enough for them to say, this guy's an anti-Semite. By the way, there was an actual anti-Semitic incident that happened in Jersey City while I was in elected office, where a gunman came in and shot up a kosher supermarket and put together some sort of manifesto that was talking about literally killing Jewish people, okay? Someone who was on the Board of Education with me wrote a Facebook post that sort of justified it and said, we should explore the message that the shooters were sending against the Jewish broods. When that happened, there were only two people on the Board of Education that asked for her to resign. And that was myself and the board president. That's it. And so when people come to me and they're like, oh, anti-Semitism, I'm like, listen, when there is anti-Semitism, I am one of the first people to speak up for your community. In that situation where one of my board members, again, 6 board members, did not say anything. Out of the 9 of us, 6 people on that board of ed did not say anything. 2 of us asked her to resign. Like, I was one of those people that stood up and said, look, it is not acceptable for you after a shooting of a kosher market to say, let us explore the message that these shooters were sending us. That is not acceptable. So when it comes to anti-Semitism, I am one of the key people that will stand up. But for you to say I'm anti-Semitic because I said there should be a ceasefire in Gaza and I wore a keffiyeh, it's just ridiculous.
So that's a deal, though? You'll wear it?
That's a deal. We can do that.
All right. So how do we support your campaign?
The most important thing with our campaign is getting the word out there. I think more and more people should be aware of what we're building and this campaign, the opportunity that we have. And I think it serves as a national bellwether, right? Yes, this is a local race, The New York Post has been talking about this race. The New York Times has talked about this race. I would love for people to understand this is probably one of the top 5 or 6 most important races happening in 2025. You have the governor's races that are happening in New Jersey and Virginia. You got the New York City mayor's race, which I think a lot of us are watching. And then Jersey City mayor's race is, again, one of the most high profile races that's happening. So I want people to understand how high profile this is, the opportunity for them to get involved. And then I think for our campaign, the most important thing is raising money to get our message out there. I'll be honest with you, when we talk to people and we knock on their doors, I think people really love our messaging. I mean, I am the hometown kid that went to public schools. My parents are both union workers. And I had a chance after Harvard Law School to go to Wall Street, but I'm choosing to do public service. And I think anyone that has hometown pride loves that story, like the hometown kid coming home to serve his community. But there's a lot of new buildings here. There's a lot of new residents. And we just need money to get the word out, right? We need people to understand like what's going on, what are we doing, what are we presenting? And I think the better we can do in terms of getting more and more people to hear our message, I think that's what wins this campaign.
Well, we have listeners in 50 different countries. So do you have a website specifically you want people to go to?
Yeah, so our website is ali2025.com. That's ali2025.com. So you can check out our website. I would love people to watch our launch video. We talk a little bit about our story and a much more compressed version of the chronology that we talked about. But I think people will find it compelling that this is a campaign that, again, is rooted in working class values and is really speaking truth to power.
So I want to ask this question a little bit differently. What I generally ask guests is, what would you tell your younger self? But that feels a little bit awkward here because you're so young. So if you could fast forward, let's just say 20 years, what would you tell your older self?
Oh, wow. Huh. That's a tough question. I often think about this. When I was working at the cancer hospital, we would often have patients who were very young, like pediatric patients who were 3 or 4 years old, had no idea what was going on, and they'd be extremely happy. It was this irony of, this joy at a cancer hospital. But the other side of the coin was we had patients who were in their 90s who were going through chemotherapy like a third or fourth time. And what always scared me was they had this fear of losing their life. And 60 years down the line, right? Inshallah, I live to an old age. I don't want to be that person that's afraid to die. I want to feel like I lived a life where I did everything to the best of my abilities. I took the risks that I had to take. I spoke truth to power. I was authentic. I stood up for my values, and I was proud of who I was as a person. That is the kind of person I want to be eventually on my deathbed. What would I say to myself 20 years from now? Listen, I think I would just say, look, I hope that we're continuing to fight for what we believe in, that we don't lose sight of our core values, that we're good to our parents, that we're good to our siblings, that we're members that are contributing to our society and trying to make the world a better place.
So I think what's interesting is because of your age and your philosophy around the youth and reaching out to them and working with them and having them participate in some of the decision making, I wonder if you're going to forget that when you're in your mid 40s, or you're going to remember to go back to the youth at that point as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I love about our nonprofit that my sister and I run is that even though every year I get older and my students stay the same age, we get to stay in touch with them. We get to feel like, all right, this is where 16 and 17 and 18-year-olds are. And I think like that has been really powerful for me, is like to watch, young people that we've mentored continue to grow up, and every year get a new cohort of students that I get to build these relationships with and realize, wow, there's a new generation of talent. There's this new group of people that are sort of coming up and are going to continue to change the world.
Mussab, it's been a pleasure. I want to leave the remaining time for you to say anything you'd like to the audience.
Thank you so much. Look, I just think the most important thing that I can say to our audience is I think it's really important that all of us continue to fight for our values and continue to be unafraid. When 9/11 happened and all the situation happened around my parents, one of the big things that I thought about in parallel to today was that there was a surveillance state placed on Muslims. The NYPD infiltrated the mosques, the community centers, the student groups right here in New Jersey. And what that led to was a chilling effect. Muslims were not organized. We did not stand up. We did not stick our necks out. And I think we're seeing a sort of repetition of those same sort of tactics. The surveillance state, making people feel like if you speak up, we're going to suppress your speech. But I think the way you overcome that, and the way we overcame that in Jersey City, was we organized and we were not afraid, right? We were unapologetic about our values, that we stood up and we stood together. And I think as long as we can continue to do that as a community, as long as we continue to build bonds with other communities, in the long run, as Martin Luther King says, the arc of history bends towards justice. Thank you.
So last thing I want to say, after you win, what I would like you to agree to as well is you and your parents come on this podcast so we can show them some love and appreciation for raising such a fantastic individual and future leader. I know you can't run for president, but maybe we can go for governor.
Inshallah, why not?
Inshallah. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Listen, stay tuned, cause it's time for Sumud.